So, hello everybody. I'm Jim Townhill. I'm a chiropractor that works in the Netherlands. This is my colleague Alan Jenks, also a chiropractor, also working in the Netherlands. We run the basic course for Applied Kinesiology, and as we're now also calling it, the manual muscle testing courses. We run a course of 4 weekends, and in which case we try to teach the basics of using this, what we consider to be one of the best diagnostic tools we know. So, welcome Alan. Do you fancy telling us a little bit about muscle testing? Because there's a lot of controversy about muscle testing.
Yeah, there is. I mean, traditionally muscle testing has been around for a long time. I mean, it's been practiced within the medical chiropractic and physio field since the early 1920s. It got its start because they wanted to find a way to basically evaluate neurological disorders, like, you know, as what happens through polio, and but we use that differently. So then George Goodhart in the late 60s developed Applied Kinesiology, taking the concepts of these muscle tests from Kendall, and then realizing that there was a much more profound way to use the muscle tests in helping us treat the body. And so, and because of that, there's controversy with it, because we use muscle testing not as a way to diagnose a neurological problem per se a medical polio or paralytic case, but we're using the muscle testing to help us steer a lot more specifically into where we need to treat the body.
So, sticking with that controversy for a moment, you're doing a PhD at Vrije University in Amsterdam. Yeah. And you mentioned you had to talk with some of your colleagues there. They're not chiropractors, they're sort of physiotherapists and people in the back pain division at Vrije University. What was their responses?
Yeah, I mean, when you talk to scientists, I mean, they're not necessarily against any of these concepts. They make a lot of sense. We just need to identify and figure out ways to scientifically validate what we're doing. So, are there ways that we can actually take what we do on a daily basis and put a number on it or put a result on it? And as of yet, we just don't have really that deep data to really confirm what it is observationally we see in practice. And when you look at the evidence-based scale, we tend to treat in our clinic more based on our preserved observations over time. And we may not have the evidence base from a scientific perspective, but what we have are multiple patient encounters, and certain procedures within Applied Kinesiology hold true over time. And it just gives us a much more specific way. And so as a result, they tend to not be against what we're doing. It's just, I mean, where is the hardcore evidence? And that's what we need to develop.
Okay. So, two of the things that most of us came across with muscle testing, even me long before I started this, and since I've done it as well, is going to the ski boot shop and they put the one arm pull down test.
Yeah.
And we also get this idea of what age were you, and we called it the one arm pull down test.
Yeah.
You also get a secondary controversy for shoulder. There are others. You can't possibly isolate a muscle. Do you want to just address those two?
Sure.
It's 2 questions, but it's sort of
okay. I mean, so the first one is this idea of just using one muscle to test everything that's going wrong with the body. And I mean, when you first look at that, there's a lot of questions that come up, is like, how valid is that? And which as a result tends to give the idea of muscle testing a bad name, because we're using one thing to test everything. But that's certainly not where we go in our coursework with it. I mean, we're very specific about what muscles we're using, about why we're using those muscles, and how to test them properly. We want, when we test, and I'll demonstrate that in a bit, we want to be as specific as we can, and just pulling down an arm for the sake of asking a question is not really going to give us anything specific other than what we want it to give us. And so if we want the muscle to be weak, it'll be weak. And we want to teach you a way to test the muscle specifically so that the muscle gives you the information that you need in order to treat. Which then brings us to the other second question you had, which is this idea of isolation. And of course, I mean, we recognize within the first hour or two within our coursework that, we say we're testing this muscle, but the reality is that, I mean, there's no way we're going to, from EMG data, be able to say that this truly is this muscle. But what we're doing is we're putting the body into the best position possible to isolate that aspect of it. So whether it's a latissimus dorsi or a teres minor or a pec major, we want to isolate the extension or the internal rotation or the flexion as best we can. And the way that we've structured our course, we do that. We ask the body very specifically in specific positions what's going on, and based on clinical observations over the last 50 years, we can then come to conclusions based on the results of those tests.
Okay. There's one thing you said that I just want to pick up on you. If we want a muscle to be weak, we can make it weak.
Right.
Do you want to just expand on that?
Yeah, sure. So we can take any muscle and we can test it, and if we want it to be weak, we can make it weak. You know, so I could just in the seated position take the arm, and I could say, look, I'm going to test this muscle now, and I want you to resist, and I can match that resistance, and we could come to a conclusion that that's strong. You know, or I could say, you know, that, you could say, like, I truly and deeply love myself.
I truly and deeply love myself.
And push up, and then I can push down a little bit harder.
I can hold you there.
And
yeah.
I could, you know, then conclude that that's weak. Well, the question is that weak? And the problem with muscle testing is that everybody has learned to do it in their way, and we have no consistent method to reproduce that every single time with every single practitioner. So that's why on our course we've really dived into this idea of how do we muscle test? What are the steps from A through Z that we need to do in order to test that? And probably in this, it's probably actually, I mean, we can just take this one arm push down test because, I mean, it's not very accurate, but we can make it more accurate by saying, like, there's going to be some rules. And the rules is that I want to monitor your response to an external force. And so I'm going to ask you to force yourself up as I push down. And so as I feel you push up, then I'm going to match that and push down. And we want to see how you respond to that, versus in that same position, me pushing down first and then you pushing up. By me pushing down first, I've just overrode possibly lots of different reflexes that then you don't respond appropriately. So when we teach, or how we teach in our course, is that we should always be testing from a patient-induced force profile first before we respond with our force to match. And when we do that consistently, we're going to get consistent results. And as a result, when we do that, what we see in clinic is that the results are a lot more specific.
Okay. Could you give me a demonstration?
Sure,
of
yeah.
test?
So let's have you with, you know, how we want to do this. We want to do this. So let's have you stand up. And we'll do a pectoralis major clavicular test in a standing position. And so there's lots of different ways to do this, but the important thing is that if we know the function of the pectoralis major clavicular, which is in this direction, so we want to internally rotate and allow the pectoralis major clavicular to pull the arm this way, then, okay, is it the sternal, the clavicular, is it the pectoralis minor, is it the clavicularis, is it part of the biceps? Yes, it's all of those. But in this position, we're isolating the pectoralis major clavicular as best we can. And then what we're going to do is we're going to ask the patient to push in this direction. And we're going to allow them to do that before we engage with resistance. And once the patient does that, so he pushes across, we feel that and we engage. Once we feel that lock, what we say in the course, then we know that we've got a strong muscle. And if that doesn't happen, then we call it weak or inhibited. And there's lots of neurology behind what we should call it or not, but the idea is that we've got a difference.
Is there any way I could cheat that?
Yeah, you certainly could, in the sense that the more you could bring in more muscles, so you could essentially bend your elbow and then add the biceps into that to create more force to overcome my resistance. So, again, this is important with when we're teaching this, is that you have to watch body position of the patient, because they're going to intuitively want to cheat. If neurologically they know it's weak, they're going to flex the elbow to try and engage more of the biceps to overcome the weakness in the pectoralis major clavicular. And that's just, you can take that back to basic neurology and basic reflex control.
Okay. And would you test me in different positions, or how would?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we could say, and we go into a lot of detail in our courses about this. So all I did was I tested this pectoralis major clavicular in a standing position. I mean, I could have you sit down, and I could test that there. And if that changed the way that muscle functioned, we could draw some conclusions about what kind of effects is the pelvis having on that muscle strength. I could also lie you down and test you there and take gravity out of it.
So you'd expect to see instant changes in the muscle?
Yeah, if there's a problem. Now, under normal situations, if you're healthy, we would expect, it doesn't matter how I stress you, your muscles are going to stay strong. I mean, if you're healthy, you're healthy. And we're trying to figure out what functional things do we need to do in the body in order to pull out problems. And that's where we look at positions or chemicals or emotions. What things do we need to stress the body, so from an external point of view onto the body, so that the body dysfunctions, so that we can then find an appropriate treatment.
So what about strength mismatches? What happens if I have like a slight female chiropractor trying to test Holland's strongest man?
Right.
Or if I have Holland's strongest man trying to test a slender female? I mean, does it work with mismatches like that?
Yeah, it does. And of course, the Holland's strongest man, when he's testing the Holland's smallest female, he can overpower her in every single muscle test without even thinking about it. So he's got to use a lot more finesse in isolating the lock or where the muscle locks out, versus the Holland's smallest female.
Yeah.
When she tests Holland's strongest man, she's got to pay particular attention to positioning, because if the weakness is there, it doesn't matter how tall or small or big or fat you are, you're going to be able to overcome that weakness. So, but she's going to have to pay particular attention to technique, whereas he's going to have to pay particular attention to finesse and softness in the test.
I think that was an important question to ask, because there's two 80-kilo-ish males. I mean, that's one of the questions I get asked, slender, weaker, smaller people.
Yeah.
But it's an applicable technique for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen this a couple times too, just within chiropractic adjusting. Some of the best adjustments I've ever received have been from the smallest females in my class, and it just they're at a height and size disadvantage, so they've got to find better ways to adjust. And it's the same thing with the muscle testing. They cannot cheat on technique. They have to own the technique right away. But that's the advantage of doing it with us, because we've got lots of workshop time, and so we can look at the nuances of the test and try and isolate where and when things are not going right, and where and when things are going well.
Thank you. If that's piqued your interest at all, unless you've got anything else you want to add?
No.
If that's piqued your interest at all, we'd love to hear from you. If you've got questions, you want to come to the clinic and observe us for a day, see if it's right for you, and see how we work, you'd be more than welcome. The links are on the website. If you're watching this, you're on the Facebook page, or a link to it. It's www.appliedkinesiologyseminars.eu. Get the EU bit. It's EU, not NL. The course is in English, I should add, because we have international students from all over Europe, and the world actually, but all over Europe. I should say there is an early bird discount. It's a significant one. It's about €400, I think.
Yeah.
Sharon, my wife, she handles most of the administration. She handles any of the phone calls you have. It runs from Hansa Chiropractic, our chiropractic clinic in Felt. So if you have any questions, drop us a line, follow the links on the website, give us a ring at the clinic, and we'd love to hear from you. Okay, thanks.